The baby boomer retirement crisis is a whole lot worse than we're being told. Thousands of baby boomers hit retirement age every day, but less than half of them are financially ready for retirement. Economists argue that by the end of the decade, Social Security will have gone bankrupt. Both the stock market and the economy will take a massive hit. Our healthcare system will be completely overwhelmed, and our workforce will see a huge gap, all due to this crisis. Ultimately, it's going to have a detrimental impact on all of our lives. And the most worrying part of it all is that older Americans predict that conditions are going to get even worse for them in the short and longer term. Baby boomers are going to completely change our economic and financial landscape by the end of this decade. The problem is that economists predict this will be a change for the worse. Over 10,000 baby boomers turn 65 every day. The generation known as the richest in all American history, born between 1946 and 1964, is also the most vulnerable to facing financial hurdles and even poverty during their final years. Data from the Census Bureau reveals that in 2020, the U.S. population over the age of 65 was about 56 million, representing roughly 17% of the total population. But by 2030, the U.S. population over the age of 65 will number an estimated 76 million, almost double what it was just in 2008. In 2008, the first baby boomers reached age 62, which is the earliest you can elect for Social Security retirement benefits. The last of them will reach full retirement age in 2031. Needless to say, that's a lot of retirees drawing on Social Security. A generation of this size transitioning out of the workforce will inevitably impact the U.S. economy in many more ways than we're actually being told right now. With more and more boomers elected to begin receiving Social Security benefits, the outlook for the financial health of the fund is concerning. With the majority of boomers likely collecting for roughly 2 decades, it seems as if a fund shortage is a matter of when rather than if. In fact, a 2015 report from the Social Security Administration states that the OASD Trust is projected to run out in 2030 if no adjustments are made. When it runs out, the SSA projects that tax revenue will be able to foot the bill for just 56% of benefits. Amid ongoing banking collapse that's forcing the government to bail out huge banks, economists question whether politicians will also bail out its citizens. Considering how shockingly large is our current debt load, with the U.S. national debt surpassing $31 trillion or $246,868 per taxpayer, it's not unwise to assume that Social Security is likely to go bankrupt. And that can occur even before the turn of the decade if we enter a deep and prolonged economic downturn. At the same time, the baby boomer retirement crisis will probably disrupt the U.S. job market in a major way. Although boomers are hitting retirement age in droves every single day, many of them aren't retiring at 65. Plenty of them are transitioning into a part-time arrangement with their companies. Some are working into their 70s. The average life expectancy continues to rise, meaning they'll spend more years in retirement than many of their ancestors. But the most logical explanation for this is the fact that many boomers haven't saved up enough money to afford to maintain their lifestyle in retirement. So their solution is just not to retire. Economists say they're paving the way for what is now called the Great Retirement, which will likely surpass the Great Resignation as the most significant trend in the labor market in the 21st century. The Great Retirement is defined by an unprecedented flood of retirees exiting the workforce, whether it is to enjoy life, health concerns, or a changing work environment. The workforce in recent years has seen an uptick in retirement, noted analysts with the Pew Research Center. By the fall of 2022, almost 30 million boomers had retired, an increase of 213% from the previous year, the firm reported. A recent study by Pew also found that 1 in 4 workers in the United States is a boomer, amounting to 41 million in total. The mass retirement likely will lead to an even wider workforce gap as companies will need to fill positions made available after the boomers' retirement. These workers generally hold higher positions, making the need for recruiters even more critical, the researchers highlighted. Consequently, inflation may persist for many more years than policymakers are forecasting right now. That's because an imbalanced labor market will prompt employers to increase wages to attract younger workers to assume positions typically executed by older Americans. But the higher wages are going to translate into higher costs for firms, which will then be passed on in the form of higher prices to consumers, and we can observe that they are already doing so. Another worrying aspect of this crisis is how woefully unprepared boomers actually are. A report released by the Transamerica Center for Retirement Studies found that the median amount the boomers have saved for retirement is $144,000. In contrast, the Bureau of Labor Statistics reports that spending patterns among this generation average between $48,000 and $49,000 per year, meaning that their savings would be completely gone in nearly 3 years after they retire. Even more alarming, in 2014, a study report from the Stanford Center on Longevity exposed that almost 1/3 of baby boomers had no retirement account. 6 years later, that percentage was approximately 40%, according to a 2022 Census Bureau report. This means that millions of people are approaching retirement without any savings whatsoever. A popular rule of thumb is that you need about 80% of your pre-retirement income to maintain your current lifestyle. Unfortunately, Social Security benefits supply only about half of that if you're an average earner. If you don't have any savings, you're going to need to seriously cut back on spending. The baby boomer retirement crisis reminds us of how the richest generation in American history is suffering from collective amnesia as to how they ended up in such a dicey financial predicament, says investment news analyst Greg Greenberg. And that leads us to another problem. Given the incredibly large number of retirements, there will be a huge shift in the balance between supply and demand in the overall economy. In other words, we must brace for a significant decrease in consumer spending, which is a decisive component of GDP. A decline in spending means a drop in consumer demand for products and services. As a result, that will cause a decrease in revenue for businesses and a hit to the overall health of the economy. So we should all expect the growth rate of the American economy to slow in the years to come as millions leave the workforce and find themselves with less money to spend. On top of all that, experts anticipate the influx of retiring baby boomers will soon lead to health care expenses that will outstrip what most retirees have in savings. That's why many healthcare providers are warning about deteriorating affordability and accessibility for millions of Americans. The baby boomer retirement crisis means that we're likely to exceed the capacities of our current healthcare system. Baby boomers tend to live longer and experience higher rates of obesity, hypertension, high cholesterol, and diabetes than previous generations. These chronic conditions require expensive treatment and care. Add to this the bloating cost of health services. Health Catalyst data shows that the costs of both inpatient and outpatient healthcare services have increased nearly 200% in the past 2 decades, a cost consumers often bear through co-payments and other out-of-pocket expenses. The costs of prescription drugs, caregiving services, and skilled nursing facilities also doubled in recent years. Even though rising healthcare costs pose a challenge to all patients, boomers are in a particularly risky position. According to Fidelity Investments, a retired 65-year-old couple in the U.S. should anticipate $275,000 in out-of-pocket healthcare costs after retiring. That's not including rehabilitation or long-term nursing care. But Forbes estimated that only 48% of boomers will be able to afford their own health care. The ongoing cost of living crisis is making things even more complicated for this group. The Great Retirement Study, released by Aberdeen in association with the Wisdom Council, highlights that baby boomers' standard of living and ability to save for the future has been disproportionately impacted by the rising cost of everyday necessities such as housing, food, and gas. The Great Retirement Study, which surveyed more than 2,000 adults aged 55 to 75, has found that the cost of living crisis has impacted the majority of over 55-year-olds, with 61% of them reporting increasing financial difficulties over the past couple of years. Moreover, 1 in 9, or 11%, says the crisis has impacted them to a great extent. Almost 7 in 10, or 68%, say that the cost of living crisis has impacted their standard of living, compared to just over half, or 52%, of American adults between 25 and 55 years old. Furthermore, roughly 2/3 or 63% of Americans over 55 have seen a drop in disposable income. In fact, the majority, 57%, haven't been able to save at all or as much as they had previously, and over a third, or 35%, have had to draw from their savings to mitigate rising costs, potentially jeopardizing future retirement plans. No wonder why so many economists predict that the crisis of baby boomer retirements will trigger a decade-long slump in stock prices as boomers, who own 56% of all stocks, sell off their holdings to meet their daily expenses. The research also found that this winter, about 3/4 or 73% of Americans aged 55 or more have also taken steps to use less gas and electricity, including not heating their homes or using appliances less frequently to save money. A third, 32%, have put major purchases like cars and home improvements on hold, while almost a quarter, 23%, have canceled services like TV subscriptions and gym memberships, and almost 3/5, 59%, are going out less to further save money. Looking ahead, more than half, 57%, of respondents over 55 expect their financial situation to get worse over the next 12 months. More than 8 in 10, or 82% of those who don't feel confident that they'll be able to retire comfortably, expect their situation to get worse, as do almost 7 in 10, 68%, who don't have a retirement plan. A similar amount, 69% of those that think they'll provide care to loved ones, believe their situation will get worse, as well as 64% of those who cite they have poor health themselves. This comes as households brace for energy cost rises of as much as 40% in April, as the government raises the discounted price that consumers have to pay for gas and electricity, and as analysts warn of a potential $788 hike in grocery bills this year amid surging food price inflation. In a nutshell, baby boomers are largely unprepared for retirement, unrealistic in their expectations, and undersaved, as noted by researchers at the Insured Retirement Institute. In the U.S., retirement wealth has not grown enough to keep pace with an aging population and other changes, and the shift from traditional pensions to individual savings has widened the retirement gap, they added. At the end of the day, this isn't simply a retirement crisis, but an economic and financial crisis that will be felt by all of us. All of this means that the future of our younger generations is being stolen from them as our leaders fail to assist older Americans. In fact, at this point, the future in America no longer looks prosperous and promising, but rather worrying and grim.